Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. I want to thank everybody for bearing with us a couple days as we're both recovering from our respective ailments. RJ, this episode coming out on Wednesday, a couple days late, but there's a lot of good news to talk about with this team, so I think everybody can forgive us.
Yeah, I think it's okay that we waited. Yes, thank you everybody for your patience there as we're recovering from various things. As you can tell, my voice not quite 100% back to normal. I just think I need a full day to rest it, but hopefully it'll get better as the episode goes on.
Yeah, we will see. All right, we've got some stuff to talk about. Obviously, the team has been playing really well. They just finished up a phenomenal road trip, RJ, in which they were able to pick up 3 of the 4 games against some pretty good competition in all of those. I'm still kind of riding the high from that. They've come home. They've played a game at home. They look pretty good in that one, able to pick up the shootout loser point there against the Florida Panthers last night. So there's good stuff to talk about there. We'll kind of dive into what they've been doing right and why this team just looks so different than the team we saw last time they were at home when they were losing to the Sharks and Ducks. So I'm excited to talk about that, talk about some of their best performing lines, how certain players are performing, and all of that good stuff. But of course, RJ, first, we've got to talk about our wonderful sponsor for this week, Queen Anne Beer Hall.
That's right. Queen Anne Beer Hall sponsoring this podcast as they do every week. And I want to point out, look, the Seahawks, the Kraken aren't the only team that's really turned things around this season or looking good. The Seahawks had a big win against the Arizona Cardinals. They now lead the division, and football games at Queen Anne Beer Hall. It is just an awesome place to go. I know it's the fantasy playoffs for you and I, Dylan. You got your first round bye. I unfortunately did not, but so I will be carrying this next week. And the beer hall will be a great place to go watch those games. They've got NFL happy hour specials, so you can get that pretzel and all your beer that you want to drink for a really good price for happy hour, and watch those Seahawks games because they're on a roll.
Yeah, they are. They're certainly getting it done. I'm kind of excited to be up here for like a playoff Seahawks run. Like that could be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I got to imagine.
Yeah,
fun.
I was there for their one lone playoff game. I think it was a couple years ago against the Niners. And man, the energy going into that one, I didn't end the best, but like it was something just being in Queen Anne Beer Hall for that. I've been in there for Kraken playoff games. Again, no disrespect to the Kraken, or because it was like a first time thing, but man, the Seahawks, it just jumps up to another level.
I bet. No, excited to see it for sure. And then you have your Armchair GM chat later this evening.
That's right. Armchair GM stream 7 p.m. tonight. We're going to step into Ron Francis's shoes, look at some of the different options for the Kraken. I think this is maybe even more interesting than it would have originally been. Last week, we were thinking maybe, okay, what's the rebuild plan? What's the tear down plan? I still have all that prepared if we want to go over it, but I think there's some more options for kind of a retool with a little bit more promise that the team is showing now, and some ways that they could add to this, whether it's at the trade deadline, if they do play well enough that becomes a necessity, or this off season. So they got some good options here that we're going to go over tonight.
Yeah, excited to check that out at 7:00 tonight at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. And then in my prospect chat, ranking all of the prospects in the Kraken organization will be a week from today on the 18th, also at 7. And our live game commentary over on Patreon is going to be on the 19th for that game against Chicago. That's a 5:30 start out here on the West Coast. RJ, like I said earlier, Kraken were able to win 3 of the 4 games on the road trip, come back last night, first game back at home, able to take the Panthers to a shootout. This team is just playing, 180 degrees from where they were when we last saw them losing to the Ducks and then the Sharks back-to-back nights. What happened?
This might be one of the biggest changes of outlook for the Kraken from one podcast to the next that we've ever had in the 3.5 years of covering this team. The Kraken really hit rock bottom the last that we talked to you on the pod. And it just felt like they had no answers. They had lost 2 straight games to the San Jose Sharks, and they needed some soul searching. And they did that soul searching, and they figured out a lot of stuff about their game, and they went on a very difficult road trip and got 3 wins out of 4 games. It was really the road trip that saved the season. Mm-hmm. And the season needed saving. and they turned their game around in a lot of ways that we'll talk about and look at what they did exactly. I think the biggest thing though is they simplified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's like they listened to that last podcast we did, RJ, right? Like they've worked on special teams. The special teams plan has gotten better. They simplified their game. You're able to then go out there and have more of a, it's easier to have more of a full 60 effort when you kind of simplify your game a little bit there. And also, I feel like just by making a couple changes to the lineup, they were able to really unlock having their plan A approach, a plan B approach for when plan A doesn't work. And then even now they're starting to be able to game plan for certain opponents because everything's just kind of clicking so well for them. And it's just really allowed them to take a massive step forward. So let's go ahead and talk about that. I think, the big thing is they're still a team that wants to skate, RJ. And what we saw through a lot of these games was their ability to dictate the pace of play again. This was something that we saw a little bit from them at the beginning of the season. It's how they were able to hang tight with teams like Colorado, Winnipeg. It's how they were able to go and beat teams like Minnesota Wild, very early on in the season there. Because they were dictating the pace of play more often than not. They were going out there. They were saying, this is going to be the speed of this game. We're going to control that. You're going to have to try to keep up with us as we, execute on our skating, execute on our breakout passes, get into the offensive zone with speed, all that kind of stuff. They got back to that in a big way on this road trip. And that was a really interesting surprise because I wasn't expecting that to work, because it felt like all these other teams had just kind of seen that, hey, look, this is what the Kraken want to do. Here's how we stop it. We either clog up the neutral zone, we stay heavy on them on the forecheck, don't let their breakout passes get going. And yet here we are, RJ, and the Kraken are able to kind of have that approach again.
Right. They've unlocked a lot of that. And I think a lot of it has to do with the passing out of their own zone. I mean, the breakouts have just gotten a lot cleaner. The passing through the neutral zone. I mean, I think last game against the Panthers, that was on full display. Vince Dunn coming back, I think, helps a lot with that, moving the puck out of the Kraken zone, the stretch passes and what he's able to do with those that keep other teams on their heels. But the Kraken look fast again, and they're able to dictate the pace in a way that they just weren't before. And I think that requires a lot of coordination, which is almost a little bit puzzling to me because they didn't have a whole lot of practice time to really rein in that coordination. But it feels like maybe they just kind of simplified what they were trying to do and just worked on executing it really well.
Yeah, it does feel like that's a little bit a part of this. Certainly it feels like they're thinking a lot less. Right. And in this case, that's a good thing. Normally, I would say that's not a good thing. But it feels like whether it's the little tweaks they've made to the system to simplify things, kind of go with controlled zone entries a little bit more. Don't worry about trying to make your pass with speed up at the blue line. Go ahead, get into the offensive zone first and kind of set up there if you need to. Or with the breakout passes, it's don't be looking to try to get all the way to that center ice red line or past that with the breakout pass. Just get it up to your blue line. Break it out of your zone. Worry about then getting through the neutral zone second. Don't worry about having to do it all at once like maybe they were trying to do earlier on in the season. Their ability just to kind of do that, it feels like, has taken that extra little bit off of these guys so that they can just kind of go with their instinct, go with their gut, and just make a play. And that's just really something that they had gotten away from. And we had talked about why they needed to simplify. It just looked like guys were thinking way too hard out there about where they had to go, or they were looking for the best play possible, or they were worried about covering for assignments for other guys. We've heard them, talk about that. Many players kind of talked about that while they were struggling there, that guys were just trying to do too much. Really does feel like, no, by just simplifying things down, just do XYZ as the program dictates, you can just move the puck up the ice and just get it done.
Right. And you only have to do your individual job. You're not trying to cover for anybody else or do anyone else's job. And I think the new line combos kind of helped with that, where it feels like everybody has a more defined job and defined role within the line.
Exactly. And we'll get to lines in a little bit. The other big thing that I noticed with this road trip, RJ, is they finally have a plan B approach, right? All year they've been trying to get this 200-foot game, break it out, go with speed. We want to be a skating team, as Dan was always saying through training camp. They finally have a plan B for if you enter the zone with speed and you're not able to convert, or the defense is already back and you're not going to be able to get a good quality chance, what do you do? And this was something that had plagued the Kraken for a long time. They would just kind of dump it in, or they would just kind of throw a low percentage shot on net and then just kind of get back on defense. And that's where we were seeing a lot of those kind of track meet style games, was just because they were kind of giving it up as soon as they got into the zone for one reason or another. What we've really seen them do now, and I do think the Lions have helped big time with this, and also the return of Vince Dunn, is they can set up in the offensive zone, and they have different cycling strategies so that they can just actually have some controlled zone time in the O zone, RJ.
Right. And they spend more time there, and it doesn't always need to result in a goal or even a high danger chance. If you can get the sustained zone time, you're not feeding the opponent's transition as long as you take care of the puck once you're there. And that's something that Dan Bilesma has really put emphasis on, is not feeding the opponent's transition, not giving them opportunities to go back into your zone with speed and create those chances. And I think that's one thing the Kraken have been a lot better at. But they're also winning more battles along the walls. They're also getting those second, third opportunity pucks to keep the zone time going. And they're working to their points really well. And when you have a Vince Dunn healthy now, when you have Brandon Montour, when you have Riker Evans, you always have somebody at the point who's capable of making something dangerous happen. I think that's added another element to their offense as well.
Right. And again, it's all simple stuff. It's always have somebody there net front for a screen for those point shots. Have somebody else kind of around the net side area maybe, or the low slot, so that they're able to be there for a rebound if the goalie makes the save off of the point shot. Like it's all the basic simple stuff that we had talked about these last couple of weeks, them needing to try in the offensive zone and just get going. It's not, hockey doesn't always have to be rocket science. It can just be a simplified game that is kind of the same the world over. And some of these things are things that are just basics that they just kind of, for whatever reason, weren't really playing with, but they're playing with them now. And you see what a big difference it makes for the group as a whole. I think being able to, yes, have that sustained zone time, not feed the other team's transition. We saw that kind of perfectly last night against Florida Panthers. That's how the Panthers want to play. They want to absolutely eat you up with quick turnovers in their zone and then get up the ice against you. And the Kraken, to their credit, they really slowed things down in the offensive zone and just said, no, we're going to control it in here for as long as possible, so that by the time there is a change of possession, you guys have to go and make a line change. And instead of being able to come and attack us up the ice. And it really did work. And they were able to execute that against the defending Stanley Cup champions, a really good team.
Yeah, and that's one way that you beat really good teams, is that you kind of get that. I almost compare it to a field position battle, right, in football, where, you just trap the other team in their own end. They've got a putt, but you're always kind of on the plus side of the field. That's the way it works in hockey a lot of the time, where if you can get that offensive zone possession time for long enough, all the other team can do is dump it back out to you, give you possession, get a change, and then you go reload and get back into their zone again. And the Kraken were able to kind of catch the Panthers on a lot of those cycles. And the better teams you can do that against, that's neutralizing their best players that can really hurt you if they're in your own zone.
Yeah, and then that kind of brings me to the new wrinkle that I really feel like is only like 3-ish, maybe 4 games old now for this group, which is you got your plan A approach, which is you want to get up the ice quickly. You want to attack through your own transition. You have your plan B approach of let's slow things down and simplify things in the offensive zone. We'll cycle it around. We'll make quick passes, but safe passes in the offensive zone. We'll play it back to the point, let our defensemen get to work offensively. But now what we're starting to see, RJ, is that they are game planning for specific opponents. And I feel like the Florida game, as we just talked about, was a great example of that. Felt like the Rangers game was a good example of that, where it was, again, if you could bog them down in their own zone, RJ, you kind of force them to have to be, physical with you to the net front. I mean, the Rangers kind of were just leaving massive gaps all over the place in high danger areas. And the Kraken were just like, okay, you just traded your captain. You just traded a defenseman who was playing a lot of minutes for you. Let's go out there and let's just take away the East-West game that the Rangers want to play. And then in the offensive zone, we're just going to take what you give us. And that's another kind of new approach for this group that we hadn't really seen at all this year.
Yeah, the Rangers game was really striking too, because that's a team that just seemed unwilling to defend the middle. And the Kraken, just as soon as they figured out, right, if we just go there,
Yeah.
they're not really going to defend us that well. And I think the goal that kind of turned it all around was the Brandon Tanev goal, where Mitchell Stevens circles around the net, and the Kraken are down 3-1 at that point. And Tanev just kind of is given this free lane to the net. He's able to tap it in. And I think at that point they realized, yeah, this space is here. And you see it with the Tolvanen goal to get right back in it afterward. Bjorkstrand with the net front tip to take the lead before the end of the period. They figured out something was working and they stuck to it. And one thing I love about this, and I love it in all sports from all teams, right, is if you see something that works, do it until the other team proves they can stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rangers just couldn't stop it in that game.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? Another football analogy would be if they're not stopping the run, you just keep running the ball, right? Like there's no reason not
I've got
to.
football on the mind today.
Yeah, clearly we do. Yeah, no, it was just very different, and it felt like they were all of a sudden like a good team, right? In a way. And not to say that they weren't a good team previously or any of that stuff, although their recent performances would have said that, I think. It just felt like, oh, this is the stuff that good teams do. These are the things that playoff teams do, is they make these adjustments. They see these openings for other teams. They're able to go out there and just execute on their plans without having to make it look difficult for themselves, just to do what they want to do. And that was the big thing, was there's like a confidence now I feel watching this group play that I did not feel a week ago.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benchmarks that you can look at too with this team, because that's something that Dan Bilesma set as a goal at the start of the year. Is we want other teams to worry about how we play and adjust to us, and we're going to kind of focus on them, right? Nobody was doing that after the San Jose game, and when the Kraken were playing in that, around Thanksgiving, nobody was worried about how the Kraken were playing. They were going to play the way they wanted to play, and the Kraken just couldn't adjust. And now we're seeing that. I think it's a good way to kind of evaluate this team, is how much are they dictating things for their opponent versus the other way around.
Exactly. And they were able to do that really effectively. I think the Carolina game is still a great example of them doing that. The one question that I have, and we talked about this last week, RJ, and it was something that was very much on the minds of, at least Jared McCann amongst the players, and then obviously Coach Dan, which was, look, we're going to be going on this road trip. We're going to be playing good teams. We know we're going to be playing good teams. We know what you have to do to play competitively against good teams, which is really show up, give, as big an effort, all of that kind of stuff. We haven't really seen them play a bad team. I guess you could say the Islanders game would be the one example of it. But when we're talking about the whole, this team seems to either play up or down to their level of competition. Given the way the Kraken are playing right now, they're playing great against all these good teams, RJ. Do you still have worries about the next time they're going to face a Anaheim or San Jose level opponent?
I do, until I see it. That's the thing. And I think Chicago will be the next opportunity. The game for the live game commentary that we'll have and we'll get to watch with all the patrons. I think that's really the next game that would convince me if they can just take care of business in that the way that they should. But I'm sorry. I'm always going to worry about something until I see the proof that they're over that. But given the stretch that they have of opponents coming up, it's a lot of good teams. I'd rather have it be that they play up or down to their competition rather than it just making sense and they lose to all the good teams, because that's definitely preferable to me at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I do think there is something about it with this group, is that they do tend to play that way. We'll see, though, now with the success that they're having against these good teams, if that just then builds a level of confidence where you could then go out against a bad team and say, like, oh, well, we've got all these basics down, maybe now is the time to try certain things if we want, or to try to install additional systems, something like that. It'd be interesting to see if they kind of take that approach, or if they kind of just try to recreate the atmosphere of, we have to play hard because these guys will get us tonight.
Yeah, and I do wonder what the practice approach is going to be, because now they're back at home. They've got a little bit of time to practice. They're actually practicing probably right after we record this. I'm going to go run over to the Kraken practice. And I'm interested to see if they try and maybe reinforce what they're doing and just kind of get crisper, cleaner, smoother with it, or if they try and add a few more wrinkles as teams see some of the stuff that comes out on tape. I don't know which way Dan Bylsman's going to go with it, but I'm going to try and keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Now, one of the big things that it also feels like has really helped a lot of this happen, RJ, is the return of Vince Dunn. And we've talked in the past about all the splits of the Kraken with and without Vince Dunn, and how they are just substantially better with Vince Dunn in the lineup from a record standpoint, from the amount of goals that they score standpoint. Just about every metric is going to be about as different as one player could make it, and having Vince Dunn back has certainly helped with a lot of this. I feel like, look, he's a really good defensive presence. I know we talk about his offense. Everybody talks about his offense, but he has helped stabilize things in the defensive zone. The ability to have him out there playing 20 plus minutes and taking some of that pressure off other guys in your decor has helped a lot. But it's his ability to break out passes. Really, it's his ability to play in the offensive zone. We talked earlier about how this team is doing a great job of keeping the puck in the offensive zone, wearing out their opponents, not letting those opponents get fed, transitionally. That so much of that is Vince Dunn, RJ. The way he can hold the blue line, the way he can control the pace of things and just kind of dictate where everybody's going to go in the offensive zone, the way he's just kind of like a field general out there, an ice general, we'll say, when he's got the puck up there at the point. He is just built different when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I do feel like a lot of, their ability to have their plan A is really fed by Brandon Montour and his big breakout passes. Feels like a lot of their plan B approach of what we do in the offensive zone once we're already there, it's really all just kind of come together coincidentally at the same time that Vince Dunn has returned to the lineup.
I think my favorite thing about Vince Dunn's play in the offensive zone is where he almost steers the forwards that are playing with him because of the way that he distributes the puck. And it's not just for passes, but it's for tips on net. And you can see the contrast from Brandon Montour, who I think is more of a traditional defenseman in that he will shoot a puck at the net up in the air, and you get to the front of the net and you battle your way there and you screen the goalie or you tip it. And Montour can find those little holes in the net, right? If you're screening the goalie and you can't track it, that's usually what we see from most defensemen. But what I love from Vince Dunn is that forwards can kind of get steered, not necessarily to those tough areas. We know the Kraken forwards struggle with getting to those tough areas, but they can go more to the perimeter. They can look for high tips. They can look for tips to the side of the net. And Vince Dunn's good at putting the puck on the ice in a way that, you don't have to just be battling net front and absorbing a bunch of cross checks to get to a position to tip a Vince Dunn shot. He's going to kind of steer you into an area that maybe is a little to the side of the net or maybe is a little high in the slot. And it's an easier tip for you. It can be harder for the goalie to read also because it's up high and you're not necessarily expecting that. But I love kind of the way that he's steering the forwards. They're acting differently than they were when he was out of the lineup.
Yeah, it's really huge what he's able to do back there and the way that they're able to play. And so much of their success, it feels like, with their cycle game, with their prolonged offensive zone approach, it just comes down to Vince Dunn and what he's able to do. And then even on the other end, when it comes to helping feed, the Kraken transition, RJ, and getting them up the ice, obviously Vince Dunn can make breakout passes. I would argue, though, the person on that defensive pair between him and Larson responsible for that, now that Vince Dunn is back, has actually been Adam Larson. We've seen some beautiful stretch passes from Adam Larson to kind of break out of the zone, try to get the Kraken moving up ice, because he kind of has, he has his partner back, and Vince Dunn is so solid, especially in those like net front defensive areas, that it's kind of freed up Lars to be a little bit more, roaming out there, and he's able to go collect those pucks, and he's no slouch either when it comes to making those long passes.
Absolutely. And I think Vince Dunn just frees up Adam Larson to do some different things, but I think they also rub off on each other a little bit. I think when Vince Dunn is in the lineup, Adam Larson just gets a little bit of Vince Dunn in his game, right? And I think vice versa too. We don't usually see. I mean, have we ever seen Vince Dunn without Adam Larson in the lineup? That's like the one game that Larson missed. I don't know, but I still think that Larson, helps Vince Dunn on the defensive side of things too. And over the time that they've been together as a D pair has kind of helped Vince Dunn round out his game in that way. And so I'm seeing the synergy again, and I love to see it. Even in the D zone too. Last game against Florida was like the ultimate example, because Larson was like kind of mauling guys in front of the net, making sure no one got to the net front, but they were switching off effectively. Dunn was making sure nobody got to the net front. That D pair as a whole was just a nightmare to play against for the Panthers. Even their big guys just couldn't get anywhere to the inside.
Right. It's really interesting because I like I said, I think Vince Dunn's defense kind of gets lost in all the offensive stuff that he does, but his net front defending is the big thing. He's so rock solid there. And what we've kind of seen this year as the Kraken really take like more of a zone defensive approach, and it's a very basic one. They're not doing anything really special back there. They're just trying to execute on the basic principles of a zone defense. And as long as you do that, you're going to, in theory, be a good defending team. What I think is really interesting is in a zone defense, and I talked about this on Patreon when I kind of did when we were doing our coaching videos over August, is you'll have one of your defensemen kind of stay close to the net, and the other defenseman, your D1, will go and try to play wherever the puck is, right? Go into the corner, try to lock guys up there, let the F1 come in and kind of help him out, dig out the puck, and then move the puck up the ice. What's interesting when that D pair is out there, and you talk about them switching off and stuff, what I was noticing on the road trip was Vince Dunn just kind of always plays the D2 role, kind of net front and kind of there where he can jump up into the slot if there's a change of possession, something like that. And then Larson will just kind of roam around and just kind of be the forever D1, where it doesn't really matter what side of the ice it is. If the puck's going into the corner, Adam Larson's going to be the one to go there and try to stop the opposing team, while Vince Dunn kind of takes care of things at home and watches the slot. And I think that that's an interesting approach. It's not often that you would have a defensive pair kind of play it that way, but it also feels like that's playing to each other's strengths.
Right. I mean, if it goes down to the corner or somewhere that you need to go initiate a board battle or whatever, Lars is probably the guy you want in there. And then he can still protect guys coming from the sides of the net, right? If both guys kind of need to be net front. So I guess that does make sense. That's an interesting observation. I love that you find things like that.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one, but the bottom line is Vince Dunn's in the lineup and the Kraken are better for it, right? We could probably spend like this whole hour talking about how they're better with Vince Dunn than without him. Other guys, we can kind of start transitioning here. To some of the stuff I had as far as like best lines, best combinations, and all that stuff, because I think that's the other thing, and we touched on it earlier, RJ, right? Their ability to play a little bit simpler, play with a different approach. Guys aren't trying to do each other's jobs because the lines kind of dictate who's going to do what out there. I want to talk about lines here, RJ, and what lines we've seen from the Kraken and what lines the Kraken should be running, because I think I've found, and this road trip was kind of a good glimpse at it, what the optimal Kraken lineup is.
Oh, okay.
All right. So
how close is it? How close is it to what they're running right now?
It was very close to what they were running the first bit of the road trip. And
okay.
that's what I think is really interesting, is they really did hit on something. And keep in mind, back when, we got the first morning skate updates from, I believe it was Piper, about what lines the Kraken were going to go with in that Carolina game, everybody was like, what are these, right? Like, what are we doing here? Dan knew what he was doing, because he put together arguably the best lineup that he possibly could from an expected goals share percentage. You have Matty Beniers playing with Yanni Gordon, Jaden Schwartz. This is a fantastic line for the Kraken. 63.2% expected goal share when they're out there on the ice. Just a great solid line. Yanni Gord's able to free up Matty Beniers to look a lot more dangerous in the offensive zone, because Yanni takes on a lot of the difficult responsibilities on that line. Jaden Schwartz is always going to be their net front to kind of draw defenders there. This is really the first ever lineup where Matty Beniers, it looks like, has that time and space to go to the slot and kind of play the way that we've always wanted him to. It looks like this is the kind of setup he needs in order to play that way, and he's playing that way, and they're having a lot of success for it. Your next, big line that was obviously fantastic over the course of this road trip was Shane Wright centering Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen. We know what they were able to do in just about every game. Obviously, that Rangers game was really their big one. 57.5% expected goal share when they're out there on the ice. Again, these are big numbers for a Kraken team that has been pretty mid when it comes to expected goal share so far this season. The fourth line, RJ, Chandler Stevens, not Chandler Stevenson. The other one.
It's tough to keep it straight.
It's all over the place. Stevens centering Ty Cartier and Ryan Winterton. 66.7% expected goal share when they're out there on the ice, because they're just going out there against other fourth liners, but that's just a good fourth line. Like, that's just one where everybody understands how to get up the ice quickly. You're looking at a lot of players who played for Dan with the Firebirds there and kind of understand the system, understand the approach, understand what their individual jobs are going to be in it. And they can talk about simplifying your game and just kind of playing positive level hockey. That's this line to a T, right? And so it has been absolutely fantastic for them. And then you kind of have like the leftover line, right? With Stevenson, McCann, and Tanev. It hasn't been great. And we don't need to get into how potentially bad it's been at a 29.2% goals percentage, expected goals percentage there. It has not been great. I think the problem is, RJ, as I was trying to break it down to see like, well, how can you improve that line? The only way to improve it is to actively make other lines worse. And then you're only even kind of getting it up to break even. So my question for you is, RJ, if you have three lines that are all operating, your worst of these three performing lines is at 57.5% expected goal share, but then you have one line that's really bad. Do you take that trade-off as a coach, or do you try to equalize things there and bring up that one bad line, but then maybe it means you're running four lines at like 50-50?
I would leave things as they are. If the team overall is playing well, I would look at the overall results and like, is this getting us wins? Is this getting us good results in games? And if it is, I would keep it roughly the same. I mean, excuse me. I guess I would look potentially at areas to tweak it where you don't take too much off of another line. Certain lines, like the Shane Wright line, you want to leave together. The way I see it, there are two lines for sure that you do not want to mess with. And that is, Schwartz, Beniers, and Gord, and then Tolvin and Wright and Bjorkstrand. Those two are working so well. Look, the fourth line, they're playing so little. They're playing well, but they're playing a very small role. I don't mind messing with that if you feel like you can take somebody off of that to make the other line better. I don't know that you can, but in this case, but that's the one where I would say, okay, maybe you can mess with it a bit.
Right. It just becomes tough. Like, we just haven't seen anything really with Stevenson work, right? Like the only line that has substantial positive expected goal share, the only one that's over 50% with Chandler Stevenson all season, the only lineup group we've seen was the Jaden Schwartz, Stevenson, Daniel Sprong line, which was also unbelievably high event. Thank you. Absolute insanity as far as the amount of things going on the ice when that line was out there, just back and forth for both teams. We know defensively it was kind of a black hole where if they got pinned in their own zone, there was just nothing they could do to get out of it. So I understand not wanting to go back to that, but you're talking about then the next best Chandler Stevenson line, RJ, being Berkey, Stevenson, Jaden Schwartz, which we've seen, a decent amount this season. And even that is only at 45%. And so it's a tough one. There's not a lot of great looks for Stevenson on here. The other one that surprised me, RJ, Jared McCann kind of seems like just no matter what line he's on, it doesn't break through to that kind of next level the way we've seen some of these other lines recently for the Kraken.
Yeah, and that was an interesting observation that you mentioned to me before the podcast, that Jared McCann didn't really, it seemed like add a bunch from an expected goals percentage. And I said that I suspected that maybe it's because a lot of his chances were kind of further out areas, but he's good at scoring in those areas. And so when you look at the actual goals and you factor in his shooting talent, that's going to change the numbers. And I believe it did. And so it looked better on Jared McCann's lines. But I will agree with you that I think the fit right here with Jared McCann, with Stevenson, with Burakovsky, it's holding him back. And we're seeing that in the lack of production over the last few games since he's been put with those guys. And same thing earlier when he was with Stevenson and Tanev. Those guys, I think, are dragging him down more than he's able to lift them up. And so by having this leftovers line, you are left with the problem of you've got your best forward kind of wasting away in this group. And what do you want to do about that? Are you willing to switch up some of those other lines in order to get your best forward some better opportunities? Or are you content to leave it because everything else is working? And Jared McCann is the ultimate team player too. Like, he's not the kind of guy that is going to feel like, oh, I'm not producing the way I was. Maybe it's because of my line mates. Let's change things up here, even if things going well. All he cares about is team success. So he's probably willing to stay on that line for however long the coaching staff feels is necessary. But it's something in the long term that maybe you worry about.
Yeah, because he just hasn't looked the same, right? Like, as massive a step forward as the whole team has taken, and a lot of guys on an individual basis are looking really good, and we're going to get to that in a second. It does feel like Jared McCann is the one guy that has been left behind with all of that's been going on. And I've been trying to figure out how you kind of get him going. The problem is, again, without taking away from something that's really, really working for you right now, I just don't see how you're able to change it.
Yeah, I don't know what you do. I mean, I guess the one element could be if Yanni Gourde is hurt and might miss a few games, because we didn't get to that injury update, but Yanni Gourde missed the end of the last game against the Panthers with an injury that we don't have any updates on. Maybe we'll get an update at practice, but if he misses a few games, that is going to necessitate some change. And then if that's the case, what do you do? And I actually question for you, Dylan, if say Yanni Gourde has to miss a few games, how are you configuring the lines? Are you throwing Jared McCann out there with Beniers and Schwartz? What are you doing?
I might consider it. I don't know. It's a tough one. I would consider throwing somebody who is Yanni Gourde like on that line. I'd like to keep Schwartz and Beniers together. I think if you throw out, either Ryan Winterton, who can potentially be like a Yanni Gourde light, or Brandon Tanev, maybe just to see what that looks like, because Tanev will go into the corners. He's going to go around and cause chaos the way Yanni Gourde does, and could potentially do that. I would experiment with something like that before I would put Berkey up there, or before I would move McCann up to that line, because I just think Matty is playing arguably like the most consistent offense we've seen from him in ever, and I just really don't want to try to mess with that. I want to see him get going and build up that confidence in the offensive zone more and more and more, and he's been really close to scoring some goals. I just think you got to kind of continue to let him cook there. I wouldn't try to then all of a sudden make it a skill line again for him.
Yeah, Tanev was going to be my answer there. And I know they went with Burakovsky on that line when Gourde missed the game against the Devils. And aside from that one goal where Burakovsky just kind of turnstile Luke Hughes by himself, like, I didn't love what I saw aside from that one play. I would go with somebody kind of more Yanni Gourde-like. And if it's Tanev too, you're pulling him off the fourth line. I feel like that doesn't alter it that much, because if you want to call up Brian Winterton, just put him there. Boom, you're back to the Carolina lines at the start of the road trip.
Exactly. So I think that's where I would go there. Anything else about lines that you would like to discuss, RJ, before we kind of move on to individual performances?
I think I do want to discuss, I guess, just kind of the way that, and maybe this bleeds into the individual performances too much, but the way that the ice time is kind of being distributed amongst the lines as well, because I think it's worth pointing out that there is kind of a clear first, second, third line in a way maybe there wasn't earlier this season. And I know the ice time still is fairly close among some of the guys, but seeing Matty, the Matty Beniers line is getting the most ice time pretty consistently. Like, they are your first line. They're getting a lot of the tougher matchups. That Stevenson line is your second line. And they're also getting some tough matchups, but they're getting a little bump down from that. And then I think way down from that is you're having the Shane Wright line is your clear third line, and their job is to feast on the plus matchups, right? They're often playing against other teams' third lines, and they're playing a lot better than other teams' third lines usually. And so that's kind of your mismatch line. And then the fourth line is just playing a traditional fourth line role against other teams' fourth lines. But it's interesting kind of having more of that clear cut distribution in my mind. And I think I just think that's beneficial for teams. And I know the Kraken have always, whether it's under Hackstall or Bilesma, like to, kind of switch that around or make it so there's basically an even top nine and you just have the top three lines. But I do like seeing a little bit more of that kind of clear 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it does feel like it's been working for them, and they've been able to find success with it in a way that they just kind of weren't before. I do think that it helps, and it also, again, it helps tell the guys what your job is, right? If one of the issues you were struggling with was guys were trying to do too much, they were trying to do each other's jobs, all of that kind of stuff, like we heard from, different players and from, the coaching staff there when things were looking really bad. One of the ways you can kind of let guys know what their role is supposed to be, what their job is supposed to be out there on the ice, is based off of how much ice time you're giving them. Like, that's how fourth liners kind of know what their job is out there on the ice, because they're only getting like 9 minutes, right? Like, they understand what they're supposed to do with those 9 minutes. If you start giving them 15, we've seen in the past with this group, sometimes it really works. Year two, that worked great with that fourth line. But at other times, you kind of lose having that fourth line edge where you have a line out there that's just going to create chaos. It's going to stifle the other team. It's going to give your guys a chance to rest and then be able to hop back over the boards. I think that is something that it's nice to see, because I do feel like it's contributed to kind of what we're seeing overall from the group.
And I wonder if that's also been part of the messaging. Again, we don't know what was actually said to Shane Wright over the scratch and with this role that he's been put in, but it really feels like, okay, the Matty Beniers line, your job is to go and be a top line, play against other teams' top competition, and keep them off the board, but score a little bit too, because you can produce. The Stevenson line, it feels like, maybe trying to hold on there against some of the other teams' top competition, but just, hold the line. And then the Shane Wright line, like, you're going to get the plus matchups, go out there and feast and just be the difference as far as scoring and producing. And I feel like that's a good situation to put a young center in.
Yeah, no, I think it's been great. The way they've handled Shane Wright since he's been back has been fantastic. We can kind of talk about that, RJ, because he's come in, he's scoring, he's making plays offensively, RJ. That line he's on has absolutely been working. Oliver Bjorkstrand, again, also somebody who was scratched earlier this season. He's really stepped up his game. Ellie Tolvanen feels like a different Ellie Tolvanen from a little while ago, RJ. You're starting to see depth scoring coming from this group, RJ, which is what the Kraken kind of needed, right? You go back to year two when the Kraken had success, they had that depth scoring further down the lineup from that, Sprong, Geeky, Donato pairing. I'm looking at this right now, right? And I'm, you go to the Kraken, you sort by goals. Jared McCann at the top with 10, Bjorkstrand right behind him with 9, Tolvanen with 8, Shane Wright with 7. That's huge to be able to have that level of production from one of your lines. And it's a line that, other teams, they kind of almost can't take the most seriously because they have to worry about the players that are up there in your top 6.
Right. You get those mismatches, and I think teams are having a hard time game planning, because you've got to send, if you're another team, you've got to send your own third line out against these guys. And you probably don't have a third line that includes, a top 5 pick on it, that includes, a 60-point scorer and Oliver Bjorkstrand in it, right? Who's on a tear, by the way. I mean, he has just been lighting it up recently. And so other teams probably don't have the guys to run with this line. And so they're able to take advantage of the mismatch. And so I like the way that they're being deployed, and it's building confidence, especially for Shane Wright. I mean, that's the other big storyline, right? Is how he's doing post healthy scratch. And in those Ducks games, in those Sharks games, because I think that was the last time we had a podcast, was after those, he was producing in those. But there was that caveat of, look, those are some bad teams. He's traditionally done very well against Anaheim and San Jose. Almost all of his career points were against Anaheim and San Jose. Let's see him do it against some good teams. And he has been doing it against some good teams. He's up to 9 points in 9 games since the healthy scratch, including 6 goals. A lot of that on the power play too. And I do want to talk about special teams later, because that's a big part of them turning things around. But you're seeing that confidence building for Shane Wright, and he's able to start scoring. And now not even on the power play, right? He has, had some even strength production as well. And he just seems to be getting better by the game.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found interesting when I went on Natural Stat Trick and I was kind of looking at everybody and looking at 5-on-5 here, it was just kind of, earlier in the year he was the Kraken's best forward from expected goals share, right? He was the guy that was, getting things done from a percentage standpoint. He was one of the few guys they had over 50% up front. But he wasn't generating a lot. He didn't feel dangerous out there. It was because he was playing such a kind of grinded out, bottom six, fourth line kind of game. And yeah, that was great. He was keeping other teams from doing anything, but he wasn't really contributing himself. Now, though, that we've kind of seen him with this, playing this other style, RJ, I look at it and, expected goals for percentage, 47.6 at 5-on-5 for Shane right now. It's not great, but with this team, that's pretty mid. He's kind of right in there with everybody else. What I find interesting, though, is when you go and you look at high danger chances or high danger goals for, especially, right? You have high danger chances. He's up to 50%. High danger goals for percentage. So this is actually when teams do end up scoring here. 69.23% to lead the Kraken. Right? He is finding ways of converting his high danger chances or the high danger chances out there for his line. And he's finding ways of kind of making sure that any chances the other team gets from high danger spots are not going in against the Kraken. And I think that that's really intriguing to see. It's a smallish sample size now since he's been back, but it's going to be really intriguing to see if that can hold up or if it's just maybe a little bit of luck right now that his chances are going in and the other teams aren't.
Right. And you could look at it both ways, but I think if you look at the high danger chances just in general, right, that's where we see Shane do his best when he's getting to those high danger areas of the ice. That's what we talked about in the call up last season. We talked about wanting to see a little bit more of that from him before the healthy scratch and go into those areas. So I think he's getting rewarded for a lot of the places that he's going to and the work that he's putting in. I would bet more on that side of things. Maybe he doesn't keep up the point per game pace throughout the rest of the season. But I see the underlying things, at least from the eye test, that tell me that this kind of thing is going to be ultimately sustainable in the long run. And heck, even in that Florida game, he doesn't get a point, but I loved what I was seeing from him in that game. He was going to a lot of the good areas. He was making some great passes. He was facilitating things offensively as well. And then on the defensive side, it gets lost with having Matty Beniers on the same team and how good Matty is defensively. But Shane Wright, in the draft, that was one of the big pluses on him, right? As he was so well-rounded for a kid his age. And we are starting to see that a little bit too. And I want to talk about at the end of the Florida game, a decision that I think shows how much trust Shane Wright has earned. So in that Florida game, you are tied 1-1 against the defending Cup champs with a minute to go in the game. And you just spent the last shift hanging on in your D zone, right? The Kraken were on the ropes.
Yeah.
And you got one shift left in the game. You know who Dan Bylsma sends over the boards? Shane Wright. It was, I believe, Tanev, Wright, and Jared McCann on a line, which Tanev for, defending, I imagine not wanting to go down. And then Shane Wright and then Jared McCann, your best forward. I mean, that's some pretty good company to be in. And it shows how much trust that he has built with Dan, with the coaching staff. Actually, I'm going to ask Dan about that at practice today. And also seeing that Shane was about 15 and a half minutes of ice time, which is more than we've seen from him in a little while. And Shane and that line were able to kind of flip the script. They had a little bit of offensive zone time. There weren't really any too dangerous chances against them. They did their job in that spot. And I think that's going to earn him more opportunities. But I just love seeing that for when you're putting out a young player, a 20-year-old with a minute left against the Cup champs, trying to hang on to a tie game. Give me more of that.
I was going to say, we get to talk to the coach just about every day, but him doing things like that says more than he'll ever say to us in a media scrum, right? Like those are the moments where the action speaks so much louder than words. And it's really cool that Shane was able to have that opportunity and that he's played well enough to earn it. And I think that's something that a lot of Kraken fans wanted to see from him kind of the rest of this season and on out. Other stuff I noticed kind of just quickly here. There's one other player that kind of follows the same trajectory of Shane here, RJ, where they're kind of like, middle of the road, normal expected goals for, but then they take a step up when you start looking at high danger chances, and then another big step up when you look at high danger goals for percentage. It's Matty Beniers. And it's, again, with Matty Beniers, I definitely believe this is real. And you look at some of the reasons why it's happening. One, not only is he finding ways of having his line convert in the offensive zone, but just nothing happens high danger wise when Matty Beniers is out against. Like he just knows how to, just stomp it out. On ice save percentage for Matty Beniers this year, RJ, 9.9448.
Wow, that is pretty darn good.
That's crazy for this team. Matty Benier is absolutely still getting it done in the defensive zone.
Yeah, and you could maybe chalk that up to luck with some players, but not with Matty Beniers. We're seeing everything that he does in the D zone, and I mean, he was elite with this even last season. He's just beyond his years with that, and so he's a joy to watch in his own zone. And as long as he is just putting up enough points to justify the ice time, to justify being put in that role, then it's fine. And he has been. And so, what are the splits? Yeah, he's got 6 points in his last 6 games. They're all assists, but like, we'll take it.
Yeah.
If you can be that good defensively and still contribute on the score sheet, that's great.
Yeah. And then maybe this will be the last thing before we get to talking about special teams here. There's, looking at the high danger chances, high danger goals, for and against, and goals for percentage there. It's not something that I normally would look at, RJ, but it felt like the season's kind of far enough along that you can start looking at this and you can kind of get a feel for how a player is, because we're somehow 30 games into the season already, RJ. Stone's throw from the halfway point. It's unbelievable how fast the season goes by. There's only a couple of players on this roster, RJ, that take a step down when you look at them from their normal kind of average 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage to then when you start looking at the chances or the goals for percentage with the high danger looks. And the two names that I want to bring up, because they're the two that they're really the only two that do this, where they take a step down when things get serious. It is Chandler Stevenson and it's Andre Burakovsky. And that's, it's a little worrying just given the contracts and term that those guys have, that they're playing that way. And it's, I just don't know that there's much you can do to kind of change. Berkey is definitely going to be Berkey. We kind of know what he's going to be there. But I know with Chandler Stevenson, I mean, he's somebody that you are giving a lot of ice time to. He is your second line center. It's worrying for me that already he's like last on the team of anybody when it comes to expected goals for percentage at 37.45. But then when you're talking about high danger goals for percentage, he's again at the bottom at only 30%, right? Like other teams just find a way of converting their high danger chances and generating them too. I mean, 93 high danger chances against for Chandler Stevenson, which is leads the team, and then only 49. So 49 for, 93 against. It's not a good look there for Chandler Stevenson. I don't know that there's a way of kind of changing him or changing the guys around him to kind of turn that around.
Right. And you mentioned changing the guys around him too. And that's maybe the most worrying part, is that it hasn't seemed to matter who's been around him. That impact has been the same. I want to credit Gino Miaukin on the Discord here for posting a good with or without you chart from Micah Blake McCurdy on hockeyviz.com, showing the numbers for every Kraken player with and without Chandler Stevenson. And every single player, other than Daniel Sprong, as you mentioned earlier, with that combo working, they see their 5-on-5 expected goal share go down when playing with Stevenson. And so it hasn't really mattered who's been with him. He's kind of had that negative impact on anybody that he's playing with. And it's worrying because, like, to get anywhere near kind of mid results, you need to shelter him. You need to put him with really good players. You need to put him in good spots. And even then you're maybe hoping to break even. It just feels like this anchor that you kind of have to work things around and play around. And right now it feels like they're actually not doing, they're just, well, I guess they are giving him Jared McCann, who's the best forward on the team, but they're kind of giving him the leftover winger, or, whoever that is, whether it's Burakovsky or Tanev or anybody.
Yeah, because nothing's really been working, unfortunately. So you just kind of find yourself in that spot. Last thing, as far as, I talked about kind of the optimal lines forward wise that the team could go with. I will say this defensively, Josh Mahura should be playing over Will Borgen. Right. I think that, the eye test tells me that. The numbers have backed me up as I finally looked at them, RJ. Will Borgen, he's having a rough year, we'll say, from an analytics perspective. And Josh Mahura, not only is he has a slightly better expected goals for percentage, when you start looking at high danger numbers, though, Josh Mahura is like one of the best defensemen on this team as far as keeping the other team from getting high danger chances. And that's something that I think is really notable. And it tells me that he should probably be in the lineup every night instead of being your seventh defender.
As much as I hate to admit it, because I've been one of the biggest Will Borgen defenders from back to year one, and I love a lot of what he brings, Borgen is having a tough year. And Mahura has looked really impressive, just quietly impressive too in the stuff that he does. Like he just keeps chances away from the Kraken net consistently. And I hate to say it, but yeah, I think we are at the point where maybe we got to discuss him being in the lineup over Will Borgen if everybody is healthy. That's a conversation we haven't really had to have much this season because there's always been a defenseman hurt, and so they've both been in the lineup. But I feel like Borgen is one of those guys who could maybe use that reset next. We talked about the reset from the healthy scratches, whether it's from Oliver Bjorkstrand or Shane Wright, Andre Burakovsky, those guys getting the message and going out and playing better after coming back. I feel like the same could benefit for Will Borgen.
Definitely. So just wanted to throw that out there as far as that goes. Anything else you want to talk about from an individual player perspective before we talk special teams, RJ?
No, I think, yeah, Stevenson and Burakovsky was kind of just the only other thing to talk. I'm glad you're finally coming around on Burakovsky.
Yeah, no, I have been. How many times have I said these last couple post games, hey, look, I was his biggest defender. And, it's been interesting because it's been different things than what people were kind of saying originally. And I do think that he's a better player at home, even though his home and road splits don't necessarily show it from like a counting stats perspective, but he just looks different when he plays at Climate Pledge than when they're on the road. But yeah, he's been a tough one to place, and I just genuinely think that the team is better off when Ryan Winterton's in the lineup than when he's out there. Even though Winterton's not going to generate offense in the ways that Berkey in theory can for you, just in practice, Ryan Winterton's just good at keeping things positive overall for the Kraken. Puck's moving in the right direction, stays in the offensive zone, all of those things. And Berkey just hasn't been that for you this year, right?
Yeah,
I know he hasn't scored the goals, and that's what everybody is really focused on. But it's more than that. It's stuff like last night where he button hooks every time he gets the controlled zone entry. It's like, great, he's getting the controlled zone entry. That's what I was saying earlier in the season is he's one of your best and consistent performers there. But if he's going to become so predictable that the other teams could just absolutely cheat up on him every time, then it doesn't matter if he's getting those controlled zone entries if he's just turning the puck over right away the moment he enters the zone.
And I guess that's one element too that I wanted to talk about. It feels like we've talked about it so much because it's all been on post games. We haven't addressed it on the podcast because this is the first one where we're talking about the Kraken's new identity and the new way that they've decided to play. That comes with some interesting decisions for players, right? Given the Kraken's new identity, certain guys just don't fit that anymore. And Andre Burakovsky is one of those guys. The other big one is Daniel Sprong, who has been sitting in the press box for the last several games and hasn't really come back in the lineup. And I feel like it could be a while before we ever saw him back in the lineup just because the way he plays does not gel with the way this team is built to succeed now. And so people have asked us, I think, a lot on social media, well, when's Sprong coming to the lineup? How long is Sprong going to be scratched for? It's going to be a while. It's going to take at least a couple injuries. And even then, I feel like the way this team is playing, look at the success Mitchell Stevens is having in the lineup, right? He is, near the opposite of Daniel Sprong, right? He's not a flashy player. He's going to go and he's going to do his job on the fourth line. And I think even calling up another Firebird at this point, if you needed the spot, might be more beneficial given the way that this team has decided to play.
I agree with that. I agree. Special teams, RJ, because that's the other thing that's kind of really taken a step forward. We spent a lot of time talking about what they could do on the power play in the past. We briefly saw it for one game. Vince Dunn's return, RJ. We saw the Montour Vince Dunn look on the power play, having them both out there. Wasn't great. Didn't totally work. I would still like to see it again, get a larger sample size out of it.
But, I like that they tried it. Credit to the team for trying it.
Yes, they at least tried it, and that was solid. We are seeing them start to have some success, though, on the power play, RJ, and it feels like it's because they have simplified things and they've taken a page out of all of the successful power plays around the league's book, which is just try to set up one-timers from your good players, right? We have seen Jared McCann moved off his spot and put on the other side of the ice so that he could potentially have a one-timer opportunity. We haven't seen too many from him, but he is there for those chances. We're seeing Shane Wright score goals on the power play because they're able to get the puck over to him and he's able to use his shot in a one-timer capacity. And I think that that's just huge. That's just what works on the power play in the National Hockey League. And it's just kind of feels good that the Kraken have kind of finally gotten around to that.
Right. Was it last podcast episode that we looked at what the Sabres did in the past, right? We were trying to look at what Bob Woods' power plays had done and saw where the success was. And so much of what we came away with was, well, that's just a good player with a one-timer on that side. And the Kraken don't have anybody like that. They don't have a right-handed one-timer like a Jack Eichel to score those goals. Maybe they do. Maybe they do, and maybe it's Shane Wright because he's been awesome from that spot. Doesn't look quite the same as a Jack Eichel on that side. He does it a little bit differently. Shane Wright is good at kind of sneaking down backdoor and putting himself in position kind of closer to the net to make that one-timer work for him. But he's done that really effectively, and it's not a position that he's been in a whole lot prior to this, whether it's the AHL juniors. He was kind of more either in the bumper spot or kind of on the right side, on not on his offside, where he can just kind of use a shot like in the way that Jared McCann does on the left side. But Shane Wright, I think, has been a big key to unlocking this power play and just giving it that one-timer option that now teams have to respect.
Right. And so much of it is he understands what it takes to be able to get that one-timer chance. And by that, I mean, he understands that he needs an open passing lane to himself, right? Nobody's going to be able to get him the puck through traffic with any sort of consistency. So he needs to move himself around based on where the puck is, where the puck carrier is, so that they have a clean look to get it over to him. And that's what I think's been most impressive for me is on a power play where we're seeing a lot more player movement, RJ, than we have in years past. And that's a huge improvement. What I've noticed, and really the differences between Shane Wright doing this and Jared McCann not doing this, it kind of shows how out of his comfort zone with being like a one-timer trigger man, Jared McCann is Shane Wright just gets it in a way that other guys on this team don't really seem to, where when they're thinking one-timer, they kind of just set up in a spot and they just kind of wait to see if the puck ever comes to them. Shane Wright's moving all over the place. He's increasing his angle. He's dropping down low. He's playing up high. He plays closer to the boards. He brings it in closer to the slot. He's doing everything he can to make sure that whoever has the puck, wherever they are on the ice, they have a chance to find him if they want to. And I think that that's huge. That's a big reason why we're seeing him maybe have some of that one-timer success in a way that we haven't seen anybody else on the Kraken have, is because he's really the one guy that seems to understand that the most, or it comes natural to him. And so I would just say anybody watch next couple power plays you see from this team. Watch what Shane Wright's doing vis-a-vis the puck carrier. Watch what Jared McCann's not doing when it comes to, getting himself open with the puck carrier. And I think that's why we're not seeing kind of Jared McCann, who in theory should also be one of those guys for you that you could trust on the power play. I think that's a big part of it is Jared McCann is pretty stationary when he's waiting for a one-timer spot, whereas Shane Wright's just all over the place. And I think that's kind of what you need to do. As long as when you're all over the place, you do it with intention, like getting open.
Yes, the good side of all over the place. And yeah, I agree with you on Jared McCann. I think power play wise, it's looking maybe like he's kind of more of a one-trick pony. He's really good at that trick, walking in from the left side and shooting it. He's very good at that. But I don't know that there's a whole lot more dimension to him there. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they handle that, given how he's showing himself on the right side. But yeah, I love what I'm seeing from the power play. The puck movement too. Last game, I mean, the way they were just zipping the puck around, so many quick passes. It is forcing other teams out of position as well, and that just feels like a timing and chemistry thing. Like they finally gotten that down.
Yeah, exactly. And again, also Vince Dunn's back. Kind of helps. Like a lot of that seems to be Vince Dunn. He really just understands and can control things in the offensive zone. It's very impressive to watch. On the PK, that's the other side of special teams. RJ, they've struggled with it at times this year. Does feel like they're starting to be a little less passive there. I think it's still a little too passive for my tastes, but we are seeing them kind of break out of that a little bit. Thankfully.
Yeah, It is still a little bit passive at times, but I think this Florida game was like one of their master classes in the power play because they weren't too aggressive, but the Panthers can burn you if you are too aggressive. But I think they were aggressive up top, and anytime there was a puck carrier kind of up high, they were aggressive. And then also just pushing guys out of the front of the net, like nobody was able to get to the middle. And the active sticks as well. On a PK, you want an active stick, which means you're moving your stick around all the time so that the power play players don't have a set passing lane at any given time. They know that if they see an open lane, a stick could go into it at any given time. And so the active sticks are really helping as well. The Panthers couldn't move the puck to the middle. They couldn't set up those cross ice passes that you like to do on a power play. And so all they were able to do really was just kind of spray and pray, just throw a bunch of shots from distance at the net and hope that they would get a lucky bounce. And they didn't. And you're not going to get those lucky bounces more often than not. And so if you can keep a team that skilled to just relying on luck, you've won.
Yeah. And then finally, RJ, let's talk about where this team is at overall. And I know you got to get going here soon to get to practice and stuff, but the Kraken are now currently sitting with a 14-14-2 record. Nice 500 mark there, as we know the Kraken like to be. We're right back to this stuff too, RJ, where they have 89 goals for, 89 goals against, right? Like this team really loves its symmetry. Where do you think the Kraken realistically stand now? Because after this great road trip, yeah, it was fantastic. It feels like they're trending up. You've got a lot more confidence as a group, all of that kind of stuff. But again, you're still only 500 at the end of the day. You're sitting 6th in your division. What do we need to see from this team realistically if they are going to be able to kind of push for that playoff spot beyond just the continuing trend of being able to play good teams close and pick up as many points as possible?
All right. And that leads to kind of a question I had for you, because you're always good, I think, about setting the expectations at the right place and making sure that everybody's kind of in a reasonable and healthy mindset. And for the beginning of the season, we talked about how 500 is okay as long as they're trending in the right direction, right? We just need to be seeing the right habits building and all that stuff, because then that leads us to believe that they're going to be above 500. They're going to kind of gain that ground. And I think we are starting to see that trend in the right direction. I mean, they absolutely are. But through 30 games, you are at 500. You have 30 points in 30 games. That is good for what? 12th, 13th in the Western Conference, which if they stay there, that is not good enough. That is not a successful season. And we talk about 500 a whole lot. One thing that I feel like doesn't get brought up really is that last year's team was basically 500. They had 81 points in 82 games. They were half a game off of 500. And we know how disastrous that season was to all involved. It got people fired. 500 is not good enough over the course of an entire season. And so I want to ask you, how soon and how much do we need to kind of adjust what we need to see and hope for from this team? Because at the end of the day, a playoff spot is probably at least 10 points, at the very least 10 points above 500. That's 92 points on the season. That's the very low end of what might make the playoffs for you. And so you do have to start gaining some ground above that 500 record. How much do we need to see that right away? And, is that reasonable to start kind of needing to see, maybe 2 wins for every loss rather than just 1?
Yeah, no, I think it's an appropriate question. And I do think it's one of those things that, if you're just going to tread water, I think realistically you could maybe make it through the end of this month, but that's pushing it potentially, right? Like what I don't want to see is, another 10 or 11 games go by and you're at the official halfway mark of the season. And yeah, through 41 games, you have 41 points, because that feels like all of a sudden that's a big hole to climb out of. Right now, it doesn't feel super insurmountable. It's not still great. You're 3 points behind Vancouver or Calgary that are both kind of battling for that second wildcard spot, but they both have games in hand on you. Vancouver's got 3 games in hand on you. So like not only do they have 3 points on you, they also have 3 games on you. That's something that's a little worrying. You got Colorado above them at 34 points. That's a very good team. So you do need to find a way to take care of business against the bad teams. We need to see them do that. We need to see that that's possible, because given the way they've played these good teams since they've figured things out, RJ, then you assume that you are going to be able to pick up 2 wins for every loss, or you're going to be able to start stashing OTL loss points, right? In a way that this team really hasn't this year. They only have 2 on the season. You're going to be able to, at least when you're playing good teams, get to overtime, pick up a point out of that game, take care of business against the bad teams. The big stuff's going to be, and they haven't really played too many games against them yet, RJ. I think it really could just come down to how well you're going to play teams like Vancouver, Calgary, right? Edmonton in your division. These kind of in-division games are going to mean a lot for you because those are the teams you're fighting for. And so that you're talking about 4-point swing games. I think those are going to be the ones that you really have to find that effort level that you had on this road trip. You're going to need it for those games most of all. And it'll be interesting to see as they kind of, come up on the schedule, what they look like.
I think that's the only way that you're going to be able to make up ground. And especially as we're seeing things start to solidify I think in the West, there's a pretty clear top 8 teams that we're going to see. And you're going to have to break into the top 8. And that's, Minnesota, Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado in the Central. Those 4, they're all making the playoffs. It'd be hard to see one of those falling out. And then, Vegas, LA, Edmonton, and Vancouver in the Pacific. And you're probably going to have to hop one of those teams. And Vancouver and Colorado look like the most likely candidates at this point. But you're going to have to win those games against those teams in order to have any chance of jumping one of them and getting into a playoff spot. It is looking like a pretty tall task this year. That bar might be pretty high. And so that's why I think we do need to make that adjustment of maybe stop thinking of mid as okay. I think there's a time where mid goes from being, where 500 goes from being mid to being bad. And that time is fast approaching. So it's going to require a proper win streak as well as the Kraken have played. They haven't won more than 2 games in a row since, mid-November. You're going to have to start stringing actual wins together if the playoffs are going to be a realistic possibility.
Right. No, I think it's a good observation. It's something that we'll keep an eye on and kind of see where they're going, but at least they're trending positive because that was not.
They've shown us that they can do it.
Yes.
That's the thing. That's what we needed to see. The season is salvaged. They've shown us that they can do it. They just need to go out and do it.
Exactly. So we'll see if they're able to kind of continue this, RJ, play well, build up one of those win streaks. I'm looking forward to it because this team is just playing it's just fun right now. They're fun to watch because they're so competitive and they're in it and they've got that consistent effort and everything. So I'm having a lot of fun watching them. You too can have a lot of fun watching the Kraken games once they go back on the road because we've gotten a lot of home games so far this season. But once they go back on the road, you can go and watch them over at Queen Anne Beer Hall. I know we talked a lot about watching the Seahawks and stuff there, but it is still a great Kraken venue to watch those games and be surrounded by fellow Kraken fans, be able to have a TV show in the game no matter what direction you're looking in, get the goal horn going off, all that good stuff. So definitely want to mention that.
Yeah, for sure. And stay tuned. Also, they always have lots of fun holiday festivities every year. Yeah. We don't have it for certain on the calendar yet, but it's coming. They've always got a lot of cool holiday stuff. So keep your eye out for that.
Definitely. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.